Alright, to kick off this video, I have some news. Basically, my computer's CPU is toast and just limping along, which I would replace, with the transmission in my car also went out this weekend, so I have to do grown-up shit like get a car loan before I can secure new parts for my PC, which I built around a decade ago. Long story short, the car needs to get replaced, then my PC needs an overhaul. This means I can't really effectively rip videos for my film reviews and video game reviews, so those are on hold for a month or so. I can stumble through non-footage needing content like my comic and novel reviews, and Aiden will still be making videos, so you can look forward to his Naruto game review coming up here, as well as a larger series retrospective. And for our Pokemon fans out there, yes, Diamond, Pearl, Platinum is in the works. What this means for you guys is not much will change, but I'm going to be dropping a lot of print media reviews, so if you hate those videos, sorry, but I guess how are you seeing this announcement since I'm doing this on one of my book reviews? Whatever. Han Solo and the Lost Legacy rounds out Brian Daley's trilogy of Han Solo adventure novels and ends the first trilogy of expanded universe novels ever put together. The book dropped just 10 months following the previous novel, Han Solo's Revenge, with Brian Daley not really changing the format of the series much. Han and Chewie are traveling along in the pursuit of money when they happen into some sort of conspiracy. You remember how these go. Following the events of Han Solo's Revenge, Han and Chewie burns their 10,000 credit reward and again are strapped for cash. After a small job, they gain 1,500 credits and, emboldened by this, head to the university where they encounter an old smuggler pal, Trooper. He introduces Han to Hasti and Lani, who think they may have found a resource-rich treasure ship, that of the fabled Queen Ron. Han, Chewie, Hasty, and Trooper, and a strange bug creature, Professor Skinks, head out to find the treasure on Delat, though the group soon see the Falcon stolen and have to try to retrieve it, traveling down a long, treacherous, snowy path. Eventually the group do get back to the Falcon and make it to the vaults for the treasure, but are confronted by Galandro, who Han tricks into getting vaporized through some vault's internal defenses. They find the treasure, which is historical but basically worthless beyond academic purposes. Han takes some, knowing he'll be able to barter and make a pittance off of it, and so the trilogy ends. Han Solo hasn't changed much since the last few novels. He's a man on a mission for treasure. This time, looking for a treasure he and Chewie can make it rich off of. Of course, as always, the loot at the end of the journey is just too good to be true, and they walk off with just enough to recoup their costs, basically, and scrape on to the next adventure. Han, as always, shows that he may talk like a scoundrel, but on the inside he has a heart of gold, something we see at the end of this novel when he lets Skinks take a bulk of the treasure, but largely takes enough to offload and break even on. Blue Max and Bullocks are along for the ride, with Han and Chewie working on the Falcon, and again are kind of the resident droids in place of C-3PO and R2, that sort of role. Though, of course, as Daley was wrapping up his trilogy and needed to explain their absence from the main films, by the end of the novel they end up leaving to help Rudrig University sort through their archaeological finds. I like these two quite a bit, and despite their absence from future Star Wars media, largely, I found them to be unique droids who did a good job filling in for their more famous counterparts in the franchise. Hasti is the female companion in this book, as was the norm, joining the adventure and leaving behind her sister Lani and her father figure Trooper, an old scoundrel friend of Han's. She wasn't a love interest to Han the way the other women in the previous novel had. She did kiss Han at one point, but not really gallivanting off with our hero at the end of the novel the way the others had, and eventually she takes up a job with Shinx at the university. Shinx is a strange creature who basically is a giant sentient caterpillar man. He confides in Han that one day he'll go into a cocoon and cease to be and become a chroma wing, basically a giant butterfly man. In this book, he works at the Zim research facility and helps Han procure some historical treasures. Finally, you have Galandro returning from Han Solo's Revenge. This time he's out for blood, trying to face Han again, who eventually tricks the cowboy, or space boy I guess, to get vaporized when nearing the treasure by automated defense systems. Galandro was cool, but I guess he's just another loose end that Brian Daley wanted to tie up, and so he was killed. Granted, the death was somewhat interesting. I think there was more to do with the character in the long run, but no one really knew what the long run for Star Wars was at this point, so Galandro was vaporized. Once again, tonally, this book feels in the vein of Indiana Jones, this one perhaps more than others, though Han is running after the treasure for riches rather than the good of history like Indiana Jones does. I think it's a fun, breezy adventure, and while moments like Galandro being vaporized may be seen as a bit darker, it's largely in service of a fun action novel with a tone not too dissimilar from the original Star Wars film it was attempting to expand upon, or of course, the later Indiana Jones, or just adventure serials in general. Overall, the novel is decent, but definitely the weakest of the three. In a way, it feels like another adventure in what felt like a series that had more wind in its sails. So the fairly hasty roundup, killing Galandro and sending Bullocks and Blue Max off, just feels a little quick to tie the series up in a neat bow. I also just found this one to be the least interesting of the three, with the locals being less unique and less unique descriptors than the previous two entries. There are innovative things throughout the first two that just aren't here, and the side characters, with exception of Skinks, who I found a bit undercooked, were not all that original. Was the book bad? No, it was actually still really fun, but I think it is the definitive worst of an overall incredible trilogy, and it almost feels like a book that would have been written as the third entry of like 15 Han Solo adventure novels had this book kept going, and I think it would have been looked upon, by me at least, with less of a negative lens. That would be it for Brian Daley's Star Wars novels, and while he did some short stories and even adapted the Star Wars film into radio drama, his impact to the novels directly ended here, though as I said in my previous videos, this wouldn't be the end of the story, as his friend and former writing partner, James Luceno, would take on his legacy and start writing Star Wars media, some published as recently as this year, with his first in-universe contribution to Star Wars being Agents of Chaos, a novel duology largely acting as a tribute to his late friend Brian, and bringing back characters and referencing this trilogy thoroughly throughout that duology, which I might add follow the death of Han's best friend Chewie. We'll get more into those eventually. I have started writing an outline on those, but for the purposes of this video, I just wanted to mention that duology in question, which almost feels like something comparable to like The Force Awakens to the original Star Wars, something of a legacy sequel, and the prospect of that I found kind of interesting. At some point in my massive Star Wars retrospective project, we'll talk more about Brian Daley's radio adaptions, no idea when, but he was definitely an iconic and groundbreaking writer and made a big impact on Star Wars multimedia history.